Are they going to the other meeting?
Talk to them or something.
Yeah, you can. And tell them to look in the check.
Yeah, hello. Right. I think we have to sign off on the website.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started today. My name is Jana Weiss. I'm the Student Life Coordinator for Online College. I apologize for the background noise. I'll mute myself here in a second. We have a wonderful guest speaker with us today, Jessica Bellant, who is with the Bridge Over Troubled Waters, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about domestic violence awareness and prevention. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me, Jana. I'm happy to be here. Okay, so thank you all for coming. Yes, my name is Jessica and I am from the Bridge. What we're going to do today is talk about obviously very serious topic in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And when I say talk about, I do hope that this can be a conversation. I know we're virtual, so that looks a little different, but please feel free. I'm going to ask y'all some questions throughout just to keep this conversational. I also want to make sure I'm answering the questions that you have. I have slides prepared, content that we usually always go over when we talk about this subject, but I also want to make sure I am covering the material that y'all are most interested in knowing about domestic violence, because we could be here all day and still not cover everything we need to talk about and know about domestic violence. We have a quick 45 minutes. So, don't hesitate to let me know if you have questions or comments throughout. You can type them in the chat or unmute yourself. I'm happy to have that dialogue. The other thing I always like to share in starting this topic is I know this is what I do for a living, is I go and have conversations about domestic violence in various different spaces and community, faith-based institutions, universities, schools, and healthcare settings, in law enforcement settings, all over community. And I know in every single presentation, there are survivors in the space. We either are survivors ourselves or we know somebody who is a survivor. That's just statistically how all of our spaces work here in America. And we'll look at statistics in a second. But I say that because, one, as we have this dialogue, being sensitive, knowing that there are survivors in this space and how we ask questions or the comments that we make. And then also, I always like to give an activation warning, what we previously used to call a trigger warning. This content is heavy. This content can be difficult to talk about. We may have our own experience with this form of violence or are close to someone in our life who has had these experiences. So if you need to step away from this presentation from your computer for a little bit, get a snack, a drink, walk around, your emotional safety is more important than sitting through this presentation. So I always like to give that activation or trigger warning as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started now that we took care of some housekeeping things. I'm going to very briefly tell you a little bit about the Bridge Over Troubled Waters, because until I started my social work program in my undergraduate degree, I had no idea that sexual assault and domestic violence organizations even existed. I am a survivor. I first experienced these forms of violences in high school. And so I wish I had known about these resources. So that's why we always talk briefly about the Bridge first. So the Bridge Over Troubled Waters, we are a nonprofit, which simply means all our services are free to the community. And we provide services to all survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and stalking. Um, excuse me. And let me get a drink. And we serve people of all genders, all genders, all face or no face at all backgrounds, all ages. So we serve all survivors and their family if they would like services as well. Okay. I'm keeping an eye on the chat box. It says, is this being recorded and do we get to rewatch it? I'm going to give that to Jan. I believe she is recording it, but I'm not sure where that's going to be posted. But going back to our services at the Bridge, we have been in the Pasadena community for over 45 years. So we've been here for quite a long time. Our main location is in Pasadena. And then we do also have a satellite office in Baytown, Texas, but we serve individuals from all over Southeast Harris County, Houston in general. There are also other organizations just like the Bridge that serve survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault for free all over Houston. So there are 11 to 12 domestic violence and sexual assault different organizations that do the similar work that we do at the Bridge, that if you live in Katy or somewhere across town, there's a similar organization to us near where you live that you can access. Okay, let's continue on. So here's a summary of some of our services. So first, we do have a 24-hour hotline. That 24-hour hotline is available every single day of the year. If you know someone who is in a crisis and needs access to any of our services, but mostly our shelter services, if they just need to talk to someone about, hey, I think I might be in a domestic violence relationship, what can I do? Or I've recently experienced a sexual assault, what are my next steps? Or I'm a family member or friend and I want to learn what can I do to help someone that I know who has experienced domestic violence or any of these forms of harm, stalking included. We do have a 100-bed shelter. That is what most people know us for, is that shelter space. But we have many other programs as well. So, but if you or someone you know is fleeing violence and needs a safe place to stay, call our 24-hour hotline, see if we have shelter space. If we don't have that space, we're going to help connect you or the individual who's calling to a place that does have availability. Now, our largest program is going to be what we call our non-residential program. And so that's for all survivors who do not need any of our housing services. So maybe the abuse happened a long time ago. Maybe they're still in the abusive relationship. Maybe the violence they have experienced was outside the home and they still feel safe where they live. So for that non-residential program, that's our largest one where most people access our advocacy services. And so people come for our non-residential services to access our support groups, to access our individual counseling, our legal advocacy, if someone's going through the criminal justice system and wants support, if someone needs a protective order and wants support in accessing that, if an individual is going through a Title IX process in their school or thinking about reporting to their Title IX office, our advocates can help someone understand their rights and gain access. Every campus, every campus has a Title IX coordinator. And faculty, staff, and students all have access to Title IX rights, simply meaning you all have access to engage in the education, the school system, without experiencing harm from someone who you could have experienced domestic violence from, sexual violence, stalking, or even trafficking. So I know Jana and any of the counselors at HCC, any of your professors, if you have gone through something, any of these forms of violences on campus, they can help you access your Title IX rights so you don't have to share classes with someone who has hurt you or harmed you in any way, that you don't have to share a work study program, and there's other accommodations as well that can be made. So please do find out who your Title IX coordinator is on your campus so that you can share that resource with individuals you know in case you know someone who goes through this. If y'all have any questions about our services at the Bridge, please don't hesitate to post those in the chat. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about our children's program, but anytime, like I said, we serve survivors of any age. And then anytime someone comes in with their kiddos, they're also going to gain child advocates. All adults have adult advocates, and children have child advocates. What are the needs of that child? What does the child want to accomplish? What does safety planning look like for the kiddos? We do have an accredited and licensed child care center for those survivors in our programs as well. And then lastly is the Education and Prevention Department, which is the department that I am at the Bridge Over Troubled Waters. And this is what I get to do. I spoke a little bit in the beginning about what I get to do day in and day out, having these conversations. What are these forms of violences? How do we prevent them? And how do we support people in our lives who have experienced these forms of violence? All right. And once again, if y'all have any questions about the bridge, please unmute yourselves or type them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll keep it moving and keep going forward. Okay, so I have a formal definition of domestic violence here on the slide, but please, if you're comfortable, share what first comes to mind for you when you hear domestic violence. Put it in the chat. It can be something you hear from media or community, or just, it can be anything. What pops into your head first? Go ahead and put that in the chat for me. And as y'all are doing that, I'm just gonna read and share a little bit about this definition. So domestic violence, it is a pattern of abusive behaviors used by one individual over another in a relationship in order to gain power and control. So domestic violence is all about one individual gaining that power and control. It is not about stress or anger management. It's not because of drugs or alcohol, that sort of thing. These things I just listed can increase the violence, can make the violence more severe, but that does not cause domestic violence, those things. Someone's desire or need for power and control is what causes domestic violence. So Robert put in the chat, family violence. Yeah, so we think about violence that happens within the home. We think about violence where children in the home are affected, where everyone who lives in the home together is affected by this form of violence. Thank you for sharing that. Anything else come to mind for folks? There's no wrong answer here. Anything else? Oftentimes I hear people say physical harm, right? And our criminal justice definition of domestic violence does include that physical violence portion. But we know from a public health perspective that domestic violence does not have to include physical harm for it to be a domestic violence relationship. There are many different abusive tactics. There are many different forms of violence that are used within these relationships. And we're gonna look at those more specifically here in just a minute. Let's see, verbal and financial. Thank you, Jana. Yeah, verbal violence, financial violence, emotional violence, intimidation, isolation, using the children. Like I said, we'll look at this a little bit more here in a second. Thank you so much. Oftentimes, people also think of a male perpetrator and a female victim. That's what most people have, that's what pops into their head. We know that anyone of any gender can perpetrate domestic violence or experience domestic violence as a survivor. So we want to make sure that we are challenging some of these myths that only girls and women can access services at the Bridge or any other agency like mine, or that that the vast majority of the time, and it's very rare, that boys and men experience domestic violence. That's simply not true. And here in a second, we'll talk about some stats. Okay, so speaking of stats, if y'all could say 1 in 10, 1 in 2, 1 in 6, how many people in our country do you think experience domestic violence in their lifetime? And this is what people have reported to research studies, right? So we know we have to take these statistics with a grain of salt. It may not fully encompass are true numbers of who in our country have experienced this form of violence. But how many men in our country would you say experience domestic violence in their lifetime? Anyone want to put their thoughts in the chat? Okay, we'll keep it going. So what we know is that for men, it is 1 in 4 men will experience domestic violence in our country at some point in their lifetime. Okay, 1 in 4. That's usually more than what people often think. When we think about women, 1 in 3 women in our country experience domestic violence. And then for teenagers, just while they're in high school, it's 1 in 3 teens. So far too many individuals in our country experience this form of violence. And that's why I always say, if we are not survivors ourselves, we know someone close to us who is, which is why this information is so important for all of us to have. Here is the power and control wheel. Now, this power and control wheel was created by Ellen Pence back in the early 80s. She created this wheel after she talked to over 200 survivors. She went over to different support groups all over the state of where she was in. She was in Minnesota, and she talked to many different survivors, over 200, about the one question that comes to mind for many people when they think about domestic violence, and that is, why did you stay? And she didn't ask it in a judgmental way, like we can often hear in community. She more wanted to know, what were these abusive tactics that were occurring in the relationship that made it really hard to leave, that made it so you felt like you couldn't leave or you had to go back. So these are the 8 power and control tactics. Now, all of these tactics do not have to be going on in a relationship for it to be abusive. Only a couple, 1 or 2, need to be present for it to be considered an abusive relationship. But for many survivors, they can check off a lot of these tactics on the wheel and say, yes, I experienced this, or wow, I didn't have words for it, but that's what I experienced in my relationship. Using intimidation is a big one. We're not going to go over all of these at length. I'm just going to touch on some that are really important that a lot of people can identify with or may not think of. Using intimidation is a really powerful tool for individuals to maintain power and control. I always say, you can think about oftentimes when we were little kids and our parents gave us that look, we knew we better shape up, or we were going to be getting in some trouble, right? Yes, for me, it was like, you're going to get a whooping. They're going to take the belt to you if you don't start shaping up. So in abusive relationships, just a look, right? Or a tone of voice, punching a wall, throwing something, breaking things, right? This is very intimidating. Maybe physical violence isn't part of that relationship at this point. But the second that individual who is causing harm punches the wall, that survivor is thinking, okay, it's the wall this time. Could it be me next, right? Their body is reacting of, could this be me that is going to be physically harmed? It could also be displaying weapons. I know I had a survivor before I did education and prevention work. I was a crisis counselor and legal advocate with survivors. And one of my survivors said that she was going to a work event, and her partner did not like that she was still working, and she was going to a work event in the evening, and he placed his gun that he had a license to carry, placed his handgun on the table and was cleaning it and said, you better make it home on time. And so this really does, imply, if you don't, I'm going to use this against you. Incredibly intimidating and fear invoking. This emotional abuse spoke is really important as well. It really is about taking someone and making them feel worthless, changing how one views oneself. It's really knocking their self-esteem down. People who cause harm are great at making the survivor feel like everything is their fault, not the individual who's causing harm, and that there's something inherently wrong with them, and that they are lucky to be with this person who is causing them harm. So there could be a lot of name calling, putting the person down, making that person feel like there's no out. that there is no life without the person causing harm, that they would not be happy without them, and no one would ever want to be with them if they tried to leave. So that emotional abuse is really important, that self-esteem piece. Isolation. And I want to encourage y'all, if y'all have examples, if you're looking at this wheel and you're saying, yes, I've experienced this particular tactic and here's how it showed up, or I've seen this happen in other peer relationships or family relationships, or here's some tactics I've seen, you know, that you'd like to draw attention to, please put those in the chat. Like I said, we can't cover everything. Using isolation is another big one. Here in a minute, I always talk about in every presentation how you can support a loved one who experiences domestic violence. Because people who cause harm want to cut off survivors from their friends and family, because it's much harder to leave if I don't have a support system to lean on when I am ready to go, or leave that relationship. It can be really hard and emotionally taxing for friends and family to maintain a close relationship to survivors, because it's hard to watch our loved ones in abusive relationships, right? We want to say, get out, get out. We're often watching them leave and returning to abusive relationships many times before leaving for good. And depending on how lethal the relationship, how violent that relationship is, people can even worry about, like family members can even worry about their own safety, and survivors might worry about their safety too and start to draw away from family and friends to protect them, or because they feel so much shame about still being in the relationship. So we're going to look at some tactics to kind of to prevent those feelings of shame, like I can't go to this family member because they've asked me to leave and I haven't, right? I can't keep disappointing them. But this isolation too can look like always like telling you who you can talk to, what activities you can do. We always say a big red flag of an unhealthy relationship is if this person wants to become your whole world and gets really jealous, possessive, angry, unhappy if you are spending time with other relationships, friends, spending time with your family without them. If you have things in your life, hobbies, you have your career, your school, people in your life outside of that intimate relationship, there's going to be a point, most likely, where that person is going to start using intimidation, using some of these tactics in order to make you feel guilty, feel bad, feel like I can't focus on these other aspects of my life. I have to cater to and focus all my attention on this person who I'm in a relationship with who's causing harm. You know, demanding phone passwords, social media passwords, having access to your location of all times, blowing up your phone, needing to know who you're with, monitoring how you dress. These are other examples of big red flags of abusive relationships. We should be able to make decisions for ourselves, right? We should be able um, to to engage in the activities we want to talk to who we want to, have relationships with who we want. Nobody should be controlling all of our behaviors and our actions, right? Jana put in the chat, trackers on phone or card, definitely. There could be physical trackers on there. It might not just be like, hey, I need all your locations turned on and I need you to be checking in. It might be like that physical tracker, definitely. We've seen that as well. Minimizing, denying, and blaming people who cause harm, experts at, like I said earlier, denying abuse, making the abuse seem minimal, like, oh, you think this is bad, you have no idea what I went through growing up, you know, and also blaming it all on the survivor, making the survivor feel like it's their fault and not that perpetrator. Children make it really hard to leave abusive relationships if there are kids in that relationship, because maybe the kids still want the parents to be together, right? And you might have to share custody with that person who caused you harm. So you still have to have contact. That can be really, really difficult. Maybe that person causing harm is using your children to continue to stalk you, right? And find out information to continue to harass and cause you harm, right? Maybe that individual is threatening to call CPS and make false allegations against you if you say you're going to leave, or if you do leave. They could threaten to call ICE and have you deported, say you'll never see your children again. They could threaten to end their own life. And we especially see this quite a bit with young people who experience domestic violence. If you leave me, I am going to kill myself, right? I'm going to end my own life. And I always tell people that they may be struggling with suicidal thoughts, or this may be a manipulation tactic. I've lost someone close to me to suicide. Now, I wasn't an abusive relationship capacity, but I'm never one to say, hey, minimize it and don't take it seriously. But it's also saying we can't do anything about it. We can, if we're that survivor, pass along a resource, that suicide lifeline, talk to them about getting help, getting counseling. But that's not a reason for us to stay in a relationship that's not healthy for us. We all deserve healthy relationships, and people have to be accountable for their actions and access their own healing. Everyone needs healing, people who cause harm and survivors. Financial abuse obviously is a huge barrier to leaving. I have worked with people who come from significant amounts of money. They were attorneys, very smart, well-educated individuals who got married, combined finances. The partner said, hey, I'll handle all of the money. Don't worry about that. And then before they knew it, the abuse got worse and worse. They didn't no longer had access to their money. And by the time they had left, they were starting over from the ground up, in having nothing. And so financial abuse can look like many different things, giving that survivor an allowance, quote unquote, to get groceries. That seems incredibly unrealistic, right? It can be convincing the partner not to go to their work anymore. It could be in the beginning of the relationship. They say, hey, you don't need to work. I'll work. You can stay home, maybe take care of the kids if we decide to have children, do some activities you love. But that can turn into a way, they could be doing that as a way to maintain more control, cut you off from more people, cut you off from financial independence. And here where it says using male privilege, this is actually slightly outdated. I need to put a new wheel in here. This should be gender privilege. So no matter your gender, using that gender with institutions. So for me, I have a male partner, and I could tell my male partner, oh, good luck. Call the police. Let's see if they believe you, right? They're going to believe me over you, right? They're never going to believe that I'm the perpetrator if I am the one causing harm to my partner. I could use my status as a smaller woman in order to say the bridge is never going to believe you. If I call the bridge or show up there, they're going to believe that I'm the survivor, not you. Okay, so it's using whatever gender you are to gain that power and control. Okay, if anyone has any questions on this wheel, please don't hesitate to put it in the chat or unmute yourself. Like I said, we're going kind of quickly and briefly over some of these things. We could talk about this in much more detail. But I also want to touch on the cycle of violence. So this is another reason why it's so difficult to leave abusive relationships, because it's not always bad. And it can be very difficult and confusing for survivors because there's periods of a relationship where things are very good. Many of the survivors that I've worked with said that when they first got into this relationship, they thought this was the first person I thought I had a healthy relationship with, that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, who really understood me and supported me and was there for me. But over time, usually after some sort of commitment is made, after love is in the relationship, maybe I love you's been said, maybe they've become exclusive, they've been intimate for the first time, they've moved in together, had a child together, gotten engaged, whatever that could look like. Then things start to change. More red flags start to show up. Abusive tactics start happening. And that happens because that individual causing harm is wanting to gain more power and control and limit the freedom or independence of that survivor. And that's kind of that tension building phase, right? We have honeymoon, which is all the I love yous, the gifts, the calm where things are good and fine. And then we end up in the tension building phase, which is where survivors talk about walking on eggshells, okay? That there are some light power and control tactics that we just talked about, right? So maybe slight intimidation if you're texting a classmate for a school project. They might be saying, who are you texting? Or wait, didn't you date them? Isn't that an ex of yours? Haven't you been out with them? And giving you this face, clearly looking angry, clearly looking upset, maybe even telling you, I'm not comfortable with you talking to them or seeing them. You need to switch your groups. What are you wearing? Who are you trying to impress? And then maybe you say, no, I'm going to go out and wear this. I don't care what you think. Or no, I'm going to keep talking to this person. I'm not going to, allow you to control who I talk to, what I do. And then it could lead to an explosive phase. So in the explosive phase, if physical or sexual violence is occurring, this is when that would happen, or else it's going to be a little bit more intense power and control tactics. So they could punch a wall, throw something, yell, curse, become more angry, make some threats. And then they're going to move back into the honeymoon phase, because the goal is not to push you away so much that you leave. The goal is to keep you in that relationship. So then they're going to be full of, I'm sorries, I love you, I'm nothing without you, please don't leave me, I'll never do that again, I'll speak to a counselor or our pastor. Oftentimes, sometimes these comments aren't genuine. Sometimes maybe they are intended to be genuine, but the cycle continues. And that's where the problem lies, right? Is not being able to take accountability, thinking that these tactics are ever okay to do someone, and then not acknowledging that, yeah, I have done harm and I need to make sure I stop and I get help, right? Jealousy is a human emotion, but even if I'm jealous, I shouldn't control who someone talks to, how they behave, how they dress. I need to check myself. Where are these insecurity issues coming from? Why do I have these jealous feelings? Why isn't there a core amount of trust as a foundation for this relationship? I need to work on that and reflect and not take it out on my partner. So if anyone has any comments, questions, feedback on the honeymoon phase, please feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself. Every relationship is different based on how much time is spent on these phases. I've worked with survivors who've been in a honeymoon or calm phase for more than a year, right? As long as that person who's causing harm feels like they're in control, right? The violence might not be happening. The violence could be more severe, and they could move through these more quickly if they don't feel like they have enough power and control. Okay, so the next topic we want to work on is, why do survivors often stay or return to abusive relationships? I think I said earlier, on average, it takes survivors 7 to 9 times of leaving and returning to an abusive relationship before leaving for good. That's a national average. That's what research tells us. So it is really hard, and survivors do stay for very valid reasons. We've talked about a couple of them already, but please type in the chat, what do you think some of the reasons are? I always cover this topic because it's so important for community members, friends, family, everyone to have empathy for survivors. The more empathy we have, the more compassionate we'll be, and the more likely we are to keep that solid relationship with them when they are going through an abusive relationship. We won't be as judgmental. We won't be as quick to say, why would you be in this? We're going to be more gentle, understanding, and compassionate. So I have a couple folks put some things in the chat. Thank y'all so much. I'm going to read these out. We've got finances. Yes, if I don't have the finances to be able to leave, how am I going to start my life over? Where am I going to live? Kids, right? I got a co-parent. This is the parent of our children. They're going to be in the child's lives no matter what. They're saying they're going to hurt the kids if I leave, that they're going to get some big fancy attorney maybe and make sure I don't have as much custody time or any custody of the children. No matter what, they're going to have access. So what does that look like in managing this relationship? Comfortability. Let's go back up. Comfortability or stability. Okay, yeah. So it could just be, hey, I know this relationship. There's no guarantee that my next relationship is going to be healthier. I could be in another even more abusive relationship in the future, right? At least in this relationship, I know what sets this person who causes me harm off. I know their triggers, right? I can walk on eggshells and keep the peace in this relationship. I'm comfortable doing that. I know what sets them off. I don't know what could set off a future person. Let's see, kind of Stockholm syndrome. Yeah, a little bit. So there is love in these relationships, right? This is not black and white. People who cause harm are not 100% evil, right? Hurt people hurt people. and healed people heal people. Now, that's no excuse for calling violence as far as, hey, this person has likely been hurt in the past. It is definitely not okay that they hurt people. What I think is important is that healing is accessible for everyone, and that we talk more about what accountability looks like, and being able to help folks who cause harm access healing so that they know that this is not okay to do in the future, that this is a cycle that can stop. This is a pattern that can be broken. But love is definitely there, and the survivor does at some point kind of can feel like what's real, what's not, am I to blame, am I not? Survivors can feel that way because of the emotional violence that's done in these relationships. They have been isolated and have no one to help. Yes, definitely. Thank you, Jana. That isolation is a very effective tactic to keep someone from leaving an abusive relationship, because who am I going to lean on or go to if they have effectively isolated me from my family, my friends? If I've burnt bridges maybe with these people because they've said, hey, I'll open up my home to you if you leave right now. If you don't leave, I can't do this anymore. I throw my hands up, right? We hear about family doing that because it is emotionally difficult to watch your loved one stay in these abusive relationships. And then one more, they still feel that affection. Yes, they still feel love in that relationship. They still love this individual, right? Thank y'all so much for putting those in the chat. You got so many of them. So the first three that are listed on here are the big three reasons, the most common ones. Hope that when they say they're going to change and they're not going to do these behaviors anymore, that they mean it. Okay. And so I'm going to stay in there while you go get counseling, or while you talk to someone, or I'm going to believe you when you say you're done doing this. Love, we talked about that. There is love. And then the third one, which we haven't talked about yet, is fear. Fear that when they say, I am going to come after you or your family, your pets, your children, you're not going to survive this if you try to leave me. Fear that that's true, that they will resort to extreme violence if you do leave. And some people who cause harm are incredibly lethal and have potential to kill their partners, right? Or loved ones. And so we do have to take survivors' concerns for their physical safety and emotional safety seriously. Most of these we've already talked about. We live in Houston, where there are so many domestic violence and sexual assault agencies. We still don't have, all of the services and programming that we need to reach the capacity of the need. But imagine living in a rural community, right? Where is there a nearby domestic violence shelter? What resources are available to flee relationships in rural communities, right? What kind of accessibility do our organizations have for people where English is not their first language, who do have a variety of different disabilities? How accessible are our institutions? And then, of course, we have to consider that there is institutional violence within many of the institutions and organizations that our survivors may or may not come into contact with after or during experiencing this form of violence. And so that could keep someone from wanting to move through the institutions as well. Social pressure. There's often a lot of pressure from family or from religious background or culture. In some faiths, you're not allowed to get a divorce, right? Divorce is not an option. So there can be a cultural pressures or familiar pressures. Hey, you chose this relationship, you chose to get married and have children, you need to make this work. So that's another huge barrier. Here's a little bit on how to support survivors. Believe them, listen to them, let them know that you're not going to judge them no matter what. Listening and not asking a bunch of questions. It's not about that, right? It's about just providing an emotional safe place. Try not to talk poorly about the person causing them harm. That's only going to make the survivor feel more shame. Instead, focus on behaviors that you've seen or what you've witnessed. So maybe you've noticed you haven't seen the survivor near as much, or they don't seem like themselves because their self-esteem is being attacked. Many survivors are going to be experiencing depression, PTSD, anxiety. Their self-esteem is being lowered. So you can say, you haven't seemed like yourself lately. Is everything okay? I miss you. I haven't seen you as much. Can we get together? Are you happy in your relationship? I noticed your partner gave you this look during a conversation and you shut down. I just want to check in. Is everything okay? I just want you to be happy. And I've noticed that you seem to pull away in a lot of aspects of your life, and I'm worried about you. Come at it from that angle instead of they're no good, they're trash, they're hurting you, you need to leave. Give that survivor the power back. Ask them how things are going. Ask them, are they doing okay? Are they happy? And then no matter what, you'll be there for them. Give them options, share with them resources about counselors at HCC or the Title IX office or hotlines like my own at the Bridge Over Troubled Waters, that there are advocates who specialize in supporting survivors of domestic violence or stalking or sexual assault, and that they can go to them for help in forming a safety plan to leave, or getting access to a protective order, whatever it is that they're interested in. And that safety plan is really important to build. And you as a friend can offer, hey, I can be a part of that safety plan, right? We can have a code word that I know I need to call the police, or I need to go grab your kids when this incident happens, right? I know we're running out of time, so I want to make sure to wrap things up. Here are some community resources for y'all. Like I said, there are many different agencies like my own. That's our hotline there at the top at the Bridge Over Troubled Waters. I've also included Houston Area Women's Center hotline there. They are an organization in Houston that has very similar services to the Bridge. Aid to Victims of a Domestic Abuse. They have attorneys on staff and they can help with legal consultation, and can really help a lot with those protective orders. I've included the National Domestic Violence Hotline here. If you know somebody who is not in Houston, the National Domestic Violence Hotline knows all about the different organizations and can provide referrals across the country and provide some more general crisis support. Texas Advocacy Project is a statewide organization that specializes in free legal consultation for teens and adults who experience all of these different forms of violences. And so they are an excellent resource. In rare occasions, they can also provide free legal representation. And then Families to Freedom Helpline is a great helpline resource for if folks need one-way ticket somewhere to flee violence. So if they're here in Houston, but they need to get to Missouri where their family is fleeing that violence, they're going to help cover the cost to flee to get to somewhere safe where maybe their family is and start new again. If anyone has any other questions, I know I've offered throughout the time that you can post those in the chat, but just wanted to offer that space again. Jana, thank you so much for dropping lots of different things into the chat and help monitoring that with me.
Thank you. I have dropped some information in the chat, especially if you came in late and want to rewatch it. The YouTube page we will be posting it to the next few days. Hopefully, maybe I don't Thursday, Friday. It'll definitely be up on Monday. And so to get it posted so you can rewatch it. And thank you so much for coming, Jessica, and talking about this subject. It's not the easiest subject to talk about. And also, I did post in there Title IX information for HCC, and I can repost it again. And counseling website. Let me repost those for you. Just in case. Sorry, I'm not using my mouse. I'm not in mine. So here's the Title IX. Oh, I thought I'd. Website if you want to check it out. And then I'll post the counseling website also. We have over 20 licensed professional counselors at HCC for students to see virtually or in person. And then we also, upcoming events, I posted that link. We do have yoga tonight. This was a very serious topic. If you need to kind of do some deep breathing and release some of that tension and stuff, we have yoga tonight. And fill out the survey. Let us know what you thought of this seminar. And Yeah, and check out our upcoming events. And Jessica, once again, thank you for coming and talking to us. Hopefully, we can have you back in the future. And I haven't seen anything come up in the chat box for extra questions. So
Yes,
we will
thank
call
you.
it a day. And I want to say thank you once again for coming, everybody. And we'll see you on the other side at another event.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye, everyone.